Hello, my name's Rowan, Chitania of Postcards and Podcasts. We're here at the King's Arms in Pembroke to talk to Howard Rudge about the Pembroke Town Walls. Good morning, Howard. Welcome to the King's Arms.
Thank you, Rowan. It's great to be with you again today.
So, why were the walls so important throughout history?
Well, I think I have to take it back a stage further to the castle first.
Okay.
When the stone castle was completed about 725 years ago, the earls decided that they would then cast a wall around the whole town to incorporate both the castle and the town behind one defensive perimeter wall, and that's exactly what they did. So about 700 years ago, the walls were, if not complete, very much well on the way to being completed to provide a defensive perimeter around the town and castle. The reason for that is that the only way to get to Pembroke Castle was to come down the narrow peninsula that is Pembroke Town, because, as you know, the town is surrounded by water.
Of course.
And that water defence made it practically impossible for anybody to attack the castle or the town over the water. I can come back to that a little bit later to explain, but then the walls themselves extended around the town with the gates in, provided virtually an impenetrable barrier to anyone wishing to attack the town or the castle.
And how would they defend these walls? What sort of methods would they use?
Well, the popular defences in the medieval period, 700 years ago, would of course be classically and key the longbow archers, who were far more deadly than anything you've ever seen in any Hollywood film. The archers could fire a steel-tipped, armour-piercing bodkin arrow a distance of several football pitches, far longer than any modern archer can achieve. But they were also deadly, and they would kill anyone in boats trying to cross. So much so that, in fact, in the recorded history of the town and castle, no one ever tried to attack town or castle over the water.
And then how about the walls themselves? What methods would they use there?
Same, in effect. You've got the longbow archers inside the town, as well as in the castle if necessary. And the focus of attack would always be ultimately at the east end of the town, where the east gate was, because that's the narrow land end of the isthmus, the peninsula of Pembroke. But they would defend the walls along the water to prevent access across the water.
Of course.
And in addition to the archers being very deadly at short range, they would use other weapons, such as, if people got close to the wall, hot limestone rock, because that becomes a limestone grenade. It explodes on impact. And the second weapon would be typically sand, because there's so many beaches. We have plenty of sand, and that would be heated up to red hot heat, and that would be poured on people, and that would strip people's skin off and set their clothes on fire. And the third weapon typically was, in fact, urine, or should I say acid urine, because all the urine could be reused and recycled, including making weapons, and reduced. The urine was reduced by boiling it to acid, and the boiling hot acid would be poured on the people below.
It sounds very gruesome. And how many deaths were there throughout history, say, caused by these different methods?
It's impossible to say, unfortunately. Okay. However, because people, as far as we know, never even tried to cross the water, we can assume that the deaths were very few and far between. But under the lee of the walls, either of the castle or the walls of the town, death would be pretty much instantaneous, because the limestone grenades, as they were known, that would explode on impact, would tear people's faces off. And the rocks, the sand, and the urine made a formidable barrier to people achieving a climb over the walls or through gates. So I would hazard a guess at several hundred at least.
Okay.
If not more.
And then how many sieges were there, or how many times was this castle
There are only 2 recorded sieges, although I think there were more from what I've researched.
Yeah.
The first one took place just 3 years after the wooden castle was built by the Normans, in which the Welsh attacked the castle, but their siege failed after 3 months. And the other siege, of course, was famously that by Oliver Cromwell of the Parliamentary armies. When they came to attack Pembroke, Cromwell brought 6,000 battle-hardened troops to Pembroke to lay siege to the town and the castle. He had naval cannon, he had grenade launchers, fireball machines, all the weapons of war that he could possibly muster. Inside the town, we estimate about 1,500 men, women and children. And after 8 weeks of siege, in practice, Cromwell had got nowhere. 1 or 2 small incursions that failed.
And did he ever get in? Or
No. The siege itself was about to fail. Parliament were insisting that Cromwell leave Pembroke and go to north to meet an incoming royalist army. But he stayed because he knew that he had 2 new large field guns, sometimes called siege guns, coming by boat to Pembroke.
Okay.
And in the nick of time, on the 10th of July 1648, they arrived on the River Pembroke. One fired a shot at the north gate of the town, which it reduced to matchwood. And that was the end, because the people in the castle and the town realised they had no defence against these new mighty weapons. And without another shot being fired, they surrendered the town and the castle to Cromwell on the 11th of July 1648.
So was this the start of the neglect on the walls since they crumbled? Or?
Indeed it was, I'm afraid. The walls had to some extent already been neglected by 1642 at the beginning of the Civil War. But the town, led by its mayor, John Poyer, had restored most of the damage. But after the Civil War, both the castle and the town were allowed to descend into sad neglect, particularly the town walls, where, of course, they were expensive to maintain, and the townsfolk were really fighting for survival in that period after the Civil War. So the walls were sadly neglected.
So after that, who occupied the castle? Or
The castle lay empty right up until 1928, when it was bought by Major General Sir Ivor Phillips. But the town did in fact prosper again. In the Georgian period, the town really did prosper and became a very successful town. Of course, a great many of the buildings in Pembroke, including this room we're in, are Georgian, some Victorian. The town prospered, did well. I think at that period some of the walls were repaired and rebuilt, but I'm afraid that by the time you get to the middle Victorian period, they sadly fell into neglect again.
I was also wondering about the East Gate, or how that was built and who copied that.
Yes, you've heard things. Obviously,
Yes.
yeah. There were 3 gates to the town. One was the North Gate by St Mary's Church, what's known as the West Gate, down at the west end of town under the lee of the castle, and the East Gate, which was a very significant gate. It was built in an unusual style of 5 arches, and it stood in the middle of Main Street, just up at the east end of town there, until it was ultimately, of course, removed. The Mayor of Pembroke decided he wanted to build sheep pens in his fields, and he used all the stonework of the East Gate and the attaching walls to build the sheep pens. But Jasper Tudor copied the East Gate when he repaired and installed the 5-arch gate in Tenby, which is in fact a copy of the East Gate of Pembroke.
I wouldn't be surprised if none of the people who actually owned the land where it once stood even know about that.
I doubt that they do.
No.
I doubt that they do.
Such an important part of history.
Yeah. So, in summary, the walls are significant in Pembroke. They're medieval in origin. All the foundations, as far as we can see, are still those medieval walls, although there have been a number of rebuilds, obviously, over the centuries, as you would expect in 700 years of history. But they've played an integral part at the heart of Pembroke's story right throughout its history. They've been defensive, protective, enclosing, allowing people to prosper and to feel safe. And one can't underestimate the psychological impact of those defensive walls and gates down through the centuries. And of course today they represent that heritage and are a vital part of the town, which unfortunately have latterly also again been sadly neglected.
Which is such a shame, considering they're so important to the town itself, not only the castle.
And of course their aesthetic beauty as well.
Yeah, along the mill pond is
in particular, yeah.
so important. It's such a shame.
The town walls and the state of disrepair has always been an issue in Pembroke. And finally, a group of people did get together and set up the Town Walls Trust as a charitable incorporated organisation, as it's called, in 2014. By 2016, they had managed to put together a team that could tackle the first project. And the first project was indeed the Tabernacle Church. Now, there are three elements to the Tabernacle Church programme. The first is the church. The second are the walls in the garden area behind the church. And the third area is the garden itself, which lies within those walls. And it was decided to set up a partnership between the Tabernacle Church, Pembroke Town Walls Trust, and Pembroke 21C, the charity based at Foundry House on Orange Lane. So we set up a partnership to work, and each individual team raised funds for their particular project. The church for the repairs to the church, the new church roof, the walls for the money to repair and rebuild the surrounding Burgage walls and town perimeter wall and lime kiln, and 21C funds for the garden that would follow all that work. That was the beginning.
And well, as we've seen, you've completely transformed that. It's looking amazing from the gardens throughout the history of Pembroke Castle. Is fascinating, really.
Yeah. The church was fully repaired. Well, perhaps they could have done more, but
still, they've done it.
With the limited funds, they did a really good job. The church is now looking splendid, both inside and out. The walls, as you've seen, have been restored, rebuilt in parts. Major groundworks were undertaken to deal with drainage problems and issues and crumbling cliff faces. But eventually that work was completed as well. And currently the garden is now ready for planting. All the beds have been laid out. The staircase up the slope on the side there has been built. And as soon as the weather is absolutely right, the volunteer team from 21C will be planting out the garden. As a history of gardening through Pembroke through the ages, as far back as 1,000 years. Certain of the beds will be planted to represent that timeline of planting and the use of plants, and other parts will be decorative, and third parts will make sure that we attend to the ecology, like catering for bees and butterflies.
It's perfect. Even your little badger run is so thoughtful.
Indeed. As you know, there's a cave in the garden which has to be left intact because it's a bat roost. And we discovered when we first started to dig out all the hundreds of years of brambles and undergrowth and trees that there was a badger run coming through the gardens and into Tabernacle Garden, and there was a not so much as a set, but a place to rest, a badger's bed, quite literally, just by the mouth of the cave. So we put a badger gate in the walls so that if they ever do come back, they've not been seen for a while, but if they ever do come back, they can gain access to that garden.
So thoughtful. And then I've noticed you've put a lot of consideration to the future of the whole operation. How your wood, was it future-proofed for 50 to 100 years?
Yes.
So down to what?
You're right. It's the next project, really, because having finished that, what we call pilot project, which is also called an exemplar, it shows a standard of what can be achieved as a platform to work from the rest of the walls of the town.
Exactly.
We had to look at what the next project would sensibly be. And we selected the north walls because, as you know, that's an uninterrupted run for over 800 metres from behind St Mary's Church all the way along to Barnard's Tower. Yes. It's alongside the river, the mill pond as it's known. It's a beautiful walk, yet the walls haven't been seen for decades because of all the ivy and other vegetation and growth and trees. Inside of all that, the continued destruction of the walls has been taking place through neglect.
So how are you going to go about preserving and fixing what's been done over these past few decades?
Well, it's worth mentioning now that, of course, all the walls are privately owned, which is an unusual situation. Places like Tenby and Conwy and other towns, the walls are usually in some form of ownership or controlled by the council or CADU. But here in Pembroke, every section of wall in each of all the plots on the north and the south side are privately owned. So the first thing we had to do was to get to talk to and work alongside the wall owners.
And then how would that affect, say, liability, and whose responsibility does it become if you're working alongside these owners?
It's always ultimately the owners.
Okay.
But that's why we had to develop a working relationship with the owners before we could do anything. It was vital to get all the wall owners on side, and I'm glad to say we've almost achieved that.
Perfect.
We have all the wall owners basically saying, yes, we can work with you, and we'll take whatever advice you can give us, because they need help as much as anyone else with regard to those walls.
Working for them,
Yeah.
How many?
Because they're all under conservation orders, so it all has to be done to a very precise formula, for the sake of argument's sake.
Yeah. How many owners are there that you're working with?
Well, on the north side, it's 59 at the moment. 59 wall owners, yeah.
And that's a range of private property to businesses.
That includes the properties which are shops, and there are private homes as well.
Yes. Yeah. So I wanted to ask what these owners have already done. So what work
Some of them have been maintaining those walls. See, the key item of maintenance is simply the removal of vegetation. The thing that kills those walls quicker than anything is that the ivy is allowed to grow uncontrolled, other vegetation, and cause particularly trees and their roots, which are very destructive. So there are many aspects to this problem, and every single aspect is expensive, because removing trees is a very expensive process, keeping ivy under control, and indeed simply the maintenance of the walls themselves. The whole technology of lime mortar is expensive because it's time consuming and therefore absorbs money. And it's a real difficulty for the wall owners to have to face, and they need help from us. And that's the plan.
I'm sure most of them didn't even know they own the walls, really. It comes as a surprise when you come in and ask if they need help repairing them, and it's, well, not the council's job, if anything.
No, it's not the council's job.
No.
The council will not get involved.
I can imagine.
It is only the town walls that can practically help the wall owners with this very difficult situation.
And have you done any work so far?
Well, we broke it down into several phases because the walls along the north side are variously in not too bad a condition and don't need any immediate attention. You've got the walls that are heavily overgrown, and we need to get rid of all that vegetation, bearing in mind the ecology as well.
Okay.
Some of the walls are in partial collapse. Some sections of the wall have totally collapsed.
Notice.
So we've got a wide range of issues to tackle. And our view was that the key problem in all this is that we could repair some of those walls. Now we'll get grants, we'll repair the walls, but what happens in 50 years' time or 100 years' time? Because it's almost senseless to repair walls, spend a lot of time and money, and then simply to let them fall into neglect again, because that's basically what would happen.
So
this is history repeating itself.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess similarly to the Tabernacle Church, you want to really future-proof yourself and think not only in the present, but say 50 to 100 years in the future.
Yeah, we have developed some plans quite considerably already in terms of trying to find a way forward that can find the sources of funding, which is an enormous task itself, to both do that work on the walls now and to provide a maintenance program that goes well down into the future. After all, I mean, those walls have been there for 700 years. 100 years is just a short time span relative to the life of the walls. Yet we have to think in those kind of time scales if we're going to do this job correctly from the outset.
Exactly.
And that's what's taking the time, is finding a formula that works for the wall owners, for the funders, and us, that works. And that's not easy. But in the meantime, there are some emergency works that we can tackle. We've raised some funding from the County Council and a small local charitable trust to do some initial work, which we can go and look at in a few minutes, in terms of emergency repairs that will at least stabilise a few key sections of the walls.
So is there any involvement with the community, say, in this project?
Very much so. What was vital from the beginning was to involve the whole community in the project at the end of the day. And what we've achieved is we've got the relationship with the wall owners. We've got developing relationships with funders for monies. They're giving us ideas of what we can and cannot achieve. But what was also vital was to involve young people as well, because we wanted to create an opportunity for the young people to become involved in their town. And one of the ways was to set up in Pembrokeshire College in Haverfordwest a new course on stonemasonry. We were very fortunate enough to be able to do that, and it came to fruition in September last year, 2019, when the very first course, and the only one of its kind in Wales, was launched in Pembrokeshire within their building division. And we've had 9 students just complete a stonemasonry course within their general building course. And we hope to continue that way into the future. But we can provide certainly initially, work opportunities for those young people, and eventually careers for them, both with the trust, as I say it, in the future, and with the stonemasonry contractors who are out there, who I'm sure will be delighted to receive apprentices who know what they're doing.
What sort of effect do you think this work will have not only on the people but the town?
Very important that we get the objectives right. Our objective all along has been, 1, to make sure we could produce a plan that could tackle this work, that could complete the work and maintain the work. 2, to involve the community at all levels for that, which we're doing. And thirdly, there's no doubt that one of the issues the town faces is getting people who come to visit the castle also coming to visit the town as well. That's really important. We have a beautiful river and walkway along the North Walls, and that's why we chose the North Walls as our first major project, because when we can get those walls at least exposed totally to the public, that they can enjoy the walk and appreciate those walls, and thirdly, to try and introduce some history by setting up, for example, guided tours around the walls and the town to attract people into this town and enhance the town as a place to visit. We want this to be a place to visit for people. We want it to be on their radar when they come to Pembroke, the town as well as the castle. And we can enhance the town, the quality of the town and the ecology, and achieve a balance between amenity and ecology to achieve our objectives.
So Howard, I can tell you've got a big job ahead of you. What is this, a repair job or?
Yes, it's essentially a repair job. The problem was a huge sycamore tree growing just behind the wall here, where the roots had grown so large they started to crack the wall apart. So we cut it down and killed the roots, and then the job we have to do is to take down the wall around the area of the major crack, take out the roots within it, rebuild, and then completely repoint the face of the wall.
Wow, and how would, say, weather affect this?
Very significantly. This is the problem with lime mortar work. Lime mortar doesn't like it cold, it doesn't like it wet, and it's difficult to work when the winds are high. And of course we've had all three all winter this year. So we're having to wait for the weather to calm down, and then you'll be seeing scaffolding going up, and we'll commence work on this section, which will last for about a month to 6 weeks.
Okay, and so what would you say the timescale of this whole?
The whole project?
Yes.
Vastly different. Several years.
Okay.
Quite easily several years altogether. But our repair work is starting this summer, and we should get quite a lot of that done as we progress. It's mostly filling holes and cracks in the walls to save any further damage.
I can tell this part of the wall is in significantly worse state than the previous part. What does this job entail?
Right, well, it certainly is not a repair. This is a major rebuild. This is one of the serious pieces of work we've got. You can see what's happened here, that the wall has collapsed because the wall A is not in very good condition. It's not been maintained. And secondly, there's been a build-up again of soil, water and so on behind it, and that's eventually caused the collapse of the wall. So the phase is in 2 phases. The work is 2 phases. In the first phase, we've got to completely destruct the wall where it is already in collapse, clean up all that stone, and then gradually rebuild it using as much of the original stone as you can, supplementing with the infill from new stone. Then once that is complete, we'll work outwards from either side to recondition these walls, completely repointing them, doing partial deconstruction if necessary in order to rebuild to make it absolutely secure. You're talking of scaffolding going up here for quite a long time, probably 3 months' work, just to do this repair and to take care of either side of the wall. And there's a lot more of this further on as well. So when you think we only have the summer months in effect to work in, you can see that the work is protracted well over several years.
And you mentioned you're working from both sides, and where you can tell it's quite overgrown on the other side. Does that involve cutting all that down just to even start working?
Yes. Part of the preparation is to prepare the reverse side, because there's no point in doing one side. Even from either side, we've got to get in behind there, and as you can see, it's a monumental job because it's a cliff face right up at the top coming down, and so you've got that pressure building up, and we've got to find a way, using consultant groundwork engineers, to determine how best to tackle the rear of that wall, what we need to do behind that wall to be effective in repairing the wall, rebuilding the wall, and that is in fact the more significant part of the work of this section. It's what we do behind the wall that you'll never see, which will make this in the end a success for a permanent, semi-permanent repair.
That sounds like a real tough job.
It is.
Just even looking at it from here.
And the groundworks behind there will probably cost more than the repairs to the wall.
Oh my.
Yes, it's going to be very expensive. A lot of engineering, drainage laying, and securing the back so that we can actually work behind there, let alone complete a successful repair.
And how would, say, the ivy growing through the walls, especially down there, affect this?
Ivy is, of course, a real killer for limestone walls because the roots eat out the lime mortar. So what we have to do with these tops of the walls along here is cut back the ivy first, check the condition, and then put up the scaffolding, and we again deconstruct the top of the wall, usually to depth of about 60 centimetres, sometimes more.
Wow.
Take all the ivy out, get all the roots out, completely treat all the stonework to kill any tiny pieces of root, to make sure there's none embedded in there when we rebuild it. And then we have to rebuild the tops of the walls to their original height. And when we do that, we also put a dressing facing on top of the wall that's waterproof to prevent water ingress down through the centre of the wall.
Well, yeah, a lot more than you could even appreciate. You'd expect just to kill off the roots, but no, you have to properly deconstruct it.
Yeah.
It's
a huge job. What you've got in effect now is 3 phases. You've got repair work, you've got tops of walls to completely clear them of all the growth and top them off so they're waterproof, and the rebuild phases and repointing phases. It's endless.
Yeah, I can see now how it's going to take 7 or so years because there's just so much to it, and working in such a tight timescale, living in, well, Wales, the weather can be so unpredictable.
Yeah. The weather is our enemy.
Yeah, I can tell.
Yeah.
Working on such historical parts, using historical methods, I guess.
Yes, it's all very traditional, but that's vital to the finished appearance of the walls.
Similarly here to before, I can tell it's starting to crumble down, but not in one place, but 3 here.
Indeed.
How bad's this, and how are you going to go about repairing it?
This is a very sorry state of disrepair and collapse, I'm afraid. It's a long section, it's a major section. Now the wall over there is leaning out. This is due to the pressure coming down of all that soil over the, not just decades but centuries, constantly coming back and piling up against it. The walls are allowed to fall into disrepair, they're not maintained, and so the collapse is imminent. That's leaning so far out that we'll have to completely deconstruct that wall and then rebuild it. Similarly, all these sections, most of it I think is going to be rebuilt completely. Point worth making before I say any more is that we can only rebuild to the original height and setup. We record everything in great detail, and when we reconstruct back what is there now. We neither add nor subtract from that, except we do fill the gaps in.
I can tell the work you're doing is vital to the history of the town. And this part of the wall looks so important. What was it used for?
Yeah, well, this is a key defensive position at the east end of the walls, because what we have here on the walls are arrow loops, as they're properly known, through which archers could fire. And they had also the option to put their heads over the wall and fire as well, but the arrow loops protected them significantly from any possible retaliation. So those deadly archers could wreak havoc with anybody trying to cross the water here. And just behind me here is a defensive tower, slightly cut down than when it was originally stood there. But that was a corner tower, again, to offer defence across the river and protecting the first corner of the east end of the walls. So that was literally a firing platform for archers, and later, of course, like in the Civil War, 1642, for the musketmen and the very early riflemen as well.
Essentially making it impossible to cross any part of this water.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing none of this was here previously.
No, the river here came right up to the base of those walls.
Similarly to the bank running where the railway line is.
Yeah, that was, of course, didn't exist.
Exactly.
So it had a clear field of fire all the way down the river.
So really a perfect defensive point.
Yeah, people may well have sailed down there or tried to row down there. Again, they stood no chance.
So here we are at the east end of the town walls. We're at Barnard's Tower. Tell me, what was the purpose of this?
Okay, well, the first thing you have to do, Rowan, is imagine no railway embankment, of course. It's a modern invention. And you're looking across a flat plain beyond here, up into the high ground where the river rises. And it was always a likely point of attack because just to the north of us over there was the east gate of the town, which was very easily defended, and the road behind it, which is also quite defensible. So this is a likely point of attack. That's why you have a mini tower there and Barnard's Tower here. Now that's large enough to house men. It was in fact a mini fortress with people,
some sort of garrison
living inside it. Indeed, it was quite simply an obvious point of attack on the town, therefore they put the strongest tower on that corner.
Ingenuity.
Of course, it's now protected. It's a bat roost. It has Dobbenton's bats in there, so I'm afraid all we can do is maintain it. But that won't be a job for the Town Walls Trust. That's owned currently by the Pembroke County Council, and they have responsibility for maintaining that tower.
Obviously, this is quite a big job. How are you looking to seek funding, or Pembrokeshire County Council or charities?
No, we really have to appeal to the likes of CADU, the Welsh Government organisation responsible for heritage. Obviously, the National Lottery Heritage Fund as well. That's a very significant player. And there are quite a number of other charities which will contribute as well. There's no one source of funding for this. It has to be a composite of many sources. Lottery funding, CADU, and other charities who specialise in heritage work. And we have to appeal to them to put packages of finance together, and it will probably be done in a piecemeal way, as to the extent that as each new phase comes along, then we'll be going back for more funding for that phase.
On that point, I'm thinking, how soon are you planning on starting? I can tell you've been doing bits already with volunteers. Yes,
we've done a lot of work on the plant life here with the volunteers. We're going to do that, start that emergency work realistically April, and continue with that emergency work for the next year and a half. In the meantime, I think realistically we could expect to see some of the major work being undertaken on the wall tops, hopefully this year in the second half of 2020, carrying on through into 2021.
Definitely.
The major rebuilding work, I think, you're going forward to probably 2022-23.
Right. And finally, to end on, I want to know, how do you think this is going to affect the town? Not only the people, but as tourism and as an attraction.
Yes, well, I think we all in this area are aware of the beauty of this spot. The fact you've got the river on one side along this walk, you've got the town wall on the other. With that town wall repaired, restored, it will look magnificent.
Definitely.
And it will be a significant attraction, certainly for us to be able to start the guided tours along the town walls and then back through the town.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. Well, a lot of work, but we're all set for it.
Thank you very much for showing me around the North Wall. I found it fascinating, and thank you so much for your time as well. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I've enjoyed myself as well, Rowan.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll see you next time.
Indeed.